We also now know that the dossier on Iraq's weapons of mass destruction was actually not the work of the intelligence services, but of a spin doctor, a former colleague of mine, a former Daily Mirror reporter who I used to see on the circuit of European political conclaves reporting for the Daily Mirror. And in the immortal words of Richard Dearlove, the head of MI6, yes, the real-life M from the James Bond movies, the intelligence and the facts were being fixed around the policy. Fixed around the policy, really? Oh, do try to keep up, 007. So yes, even the last transcendental signifier, James Bond, is now polluted. And as a result, what we now have is not a coalition of the willing, but a coalition of the unwilling. And in this, the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney is an ally. Yes, because it marked its debut last year by carrying out an opinion poll, a very important one, asking Australians about their attitudes to the military relationship with the United States. 74% of Americans believe that participation in the war on terrorism is making them less safe, not more. Opinion among Australians on Australia's continuing troop commitment to Afghanistan is actually split right down the middle. It would only take one serious, significant incident to begin to push that into the realm of the politically unsustainable. And here is the one that interests me the most. 48% of Australians now say they would be in favour of Australia having an independent foreign policy, not being part of the US alliance after all. Now, I speak to you as one who has been trying to raise that perspective in the hallowed pages of the Sydney Morning Herald all this week. So you are among the privileged, he said, because you have the article that I was trying to place in the newspaper in your delegate pack in our present edition of Peace Rights. But it hasn't attained any wider currency because the Sydney Morning Herald deems that opinion to be out with the bounds of what can, at the moment, be opined in its pages. So this is a problem. This is part of the war journalism problem to which I will return. I say problem. I'm going to hesitate to use it, but use it anyway. What I'm going to suggest is that it's possible to problematize the reporting we get. It's one of the words I had to learn when I made the transition from being a hack to being an academic. When I learned there's nothing essential about essentialism, and that there's more to being reactionary than simply reacting to things. That's another story. And this situation in Australia has been replicated around the world. The interesting thing is this: these perspectives are not prominent in mainstream media discourses, they're not prominent in mainstream political discourses, and yet it's an opinion which more and more people have come to hold. The question is how? The question is why? That's an interesting question. Where are the unconvinced getting their information from? And that's an important one to which we'll return. Now, what's happened in response to this situation is that US military interests are increasingly being pursued on a covert basis. So we have the US stealth wars, and this is a little snapshot of the state of the US stealth wars around the world at the moment. The Philippines once laboured under the military dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos, who was one of the variants of the comments I'm sure you've heard applied to the Somoza regime in Nicaragua. He may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. So the US was identified as his big sponsor. And so when the Philippines got rid of Marcos in a people power revolution in 1986, they also got rid of the military bases, the Clark Air Base and the Subic Naval Base. A strategic setback for Washington, which ever since has been trying to get back in. And now, according to a report by the NGO Focus on the Global South, a covert attempt is underway to establish lily-pad military bases. The revolution in military affairs has enabled operative bases to be much smaller than in previous generations, and under the rubric of the war on terrorism and the thickening network of military contacts with the United States, lily-pad military bases are being covertly established. Then there's the sponsorship in training and weapons supply of the Ethiopian army to carry out the invasion of Somalia, as a client state of the United States, and the troop surge in Iraq. And this is interesting because the troop surge is claimed with a fair degree of plausibility by a think tank called the American Enterprise Institute. The American Enterprise Institute, whose then director, Michael Ledeen, characterized the purpose of the invasion of Iraq thus: every 10 years or so, the US has to pick up some crappy little country and kick it against the wall, just to show the rest of the world we mean business. And the same American Enterprise Institute has now brought you the idea of the troop surge, or the troop misnomer, as I call it. Because, of course, Lieutenant General David Petraeus has just testified in front of US senators that no, I'm afraid you can't look forward to large numbers of American troops coming home. The surge is intended to be permanent. America is not looking for an exit strategy from Iraq. The invasion was exactly what it looked like, the beginning of an entry strategy. The Balad Air Base, the Green Zone in Baghdad, are intended to be permanent. So is the surge. Okay? At Menwith Hill in the United Kingdom, the distant cousin of the Pine Gap listening station here in Australia, the decision was announced that Britain was going to host part of the US missile shield at the Menwith Hill listening station, and that decision had to be sneaked out on the day that Tony Blair left number 10 Downing Street and Gordon Brown came in. So in every newspaper, from page 1 to 15, new Prime Minister. Bottom of page 16, oh, by the way, we're still part of the American Empire, so it doesn't matter. Okay? And indeed, here in Australia, what was it Paul Keating said about Andrew Peacock? Never knew a souffle could rise twice, mate. Well, a third time. Yay, a third time. Now, as in his new incarnation as chief salesman for Boeing, and apparently successfully selling to Australia the redundant Super Hornet fighter at the cost of $6 billion. All interventions having to be pushed forward below the radar of normal public and parliamentary scrutiny. So you could say it's time for Australians for an independent foreign policy. Who is going to be aggrieved on my behalf that I didn't get my article into the Sydney Morning Herald? Sydney University? Maybe. Maybe Australians for an independent foreign policy, who could be exercised, indeed, about the continuing complicity in the bombing of Iraq and Afghanistan arising out of the role played by the Pine Gap listening station. Also, Operation Talisman Sabre, the protest against which you see here. Research commissioned in the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies suggested that the cost of the exercise, including a new real-time military information system, was $130 million. That's about the same cost as the annual bill for Australia's commitment to various peacekeeping operations around the world. So if we weren't wasting our time playing silly games with the United States, we could redouble our efforts at peacekeeping. So it's worth asking the question, in passing, what are they training for? This marked the debut of a new mock town as the venue for training in urban warfare. Of course, the Defence Department won't say where it's supposed to be, because to suggest a candidate is to reveal the absurdity. Can't be Iraq, we're pulling out. Can't be Afghanistan, we're very, very edgy about how far we're in already. Indonesia, China, the Philippines, absurd. Talking to Hamas. Colleagues from the Marrickville Peace Group are off to Bethlehem as part of their town twinning initiative. Stephen Smith says you can't talk to Hamas. 64% of Israelis want Israel to talk to Hamas. Right? So it's not on Israel's behalf that we're refraining from talking to the legitimately elected representative government of the Palestinian people. It's on Washington's behalf. Hamas belongs on the far side of that bifurcation of the world into good and evil. And then there's the Super Hornet fighter.